2 years ago, my sister ran off with my roommate. They mocked my new apartment. Living above a laundromat? She snorted. He added, smells like failure. Then my landlord said, say hello to the new building owner. I held up the keys. Their smiles faded instantly. I remember that night so clearly, even though it feels like a lifetime ago. It was one of those evenings where everything seemed quiet, but you could feel the tension creeping in. The kind of night where even the smallest of things seems to carry so much weight. Holly had called me a few hours earlier, her voice a little too cheerful, a little too excited. She wanted to catch up. I knew better than to think this was a simple sisterly chat. I could hear the undercurrent of something, maybe guilt? Or maybe she just thought I'd moved on from what had happened between us. Luke, her new boyfriend, was my ex. I found out about their relationship in the worst way possible, when they showed up together at a party, laughing as if they hadn't torn my life apart just weeks before. They didn't even try to hide it. Holly had always been impulsive, but I never thought she'd betray me like that, not after everything we had been through. So, when she called me that night and asked to meet up, I thought maybe it was finally time for some closure. I was wrong. When I walked into the small cafe they had chosen, I immediately knew something was off. Holly and Luke were sitting together, too close. The way they looked at each other made me sick. Hey, I said, my voice flat, trying to keep my emotions in check. You wanted to talk? Holly gave me a fake smile. Yeah, we've been meaning to catch up. You know, now that things are different. Her words were a jab I hadn't expected. But the real sting came when Luke, who had been avoiding my gaze, finally looked up. How's the new place? He asked, his voice overly casual, almost mocking. I should have seen it coming. Of course, they were together now. But what really hit me wasn't the fact that they were together, it was the fact that they weren't even sorry. No remorse, no apology. Just a cold indifference as if I was the one who had wronged them. I didn't need to hear it from them anymore. I had heard enough. I left the cafe feeling numb. It didn't take long to pack up my things and leave the apartment I had shared with Luke. I didn't want to stay there anymore. The place that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. I found a new spot. It wasn't much, just a small apartment above a laundromat. The smell of soap and bleach was constant, but it was mine. I wasn't expecting to see Holly for a while after that. I figured she would be busy living her new life with Luke, but a few weeks later, she showed up unannounced at my door. The look on her face when she saw where I was living. It almost felt like she was surprised I hadn't just crawled back to them, begging for forgiveness. Living above a laundromat, she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I guess this is what you've come to. Smells like failure. I wanted to say so many things to her in that moment. But I didn't. I wasn't angry anymore, at least, not in the way I used to be. Instead, I just shrugged and invited her inside. Maybe it was petty of me, but I knew she expected me to apologize for ruining my life by moving here. Luke was with her, standing awkwardly by the door. He didn't say much, but the way he looked at me, it was a mixture of guilt and something else, maybe confusion. I'm sure he didn't expect me to actually go through with moving. To make it work. To rebuild my life. Is this it? This is where you're going to stay? Holly continued, her eyes scanning the small apartment, her lips curling in disgust. What happened to you? You used to have everything, money, the perfect apartment, Luke. I ignored her. I was beyond caring about her opinions anymore. But there was something Holly hadn't counted on. Mr. Russo, the landlord, had been a godsend during that time. He'd taken a chance on me when I needed it the most, and I knew he had a plan all along. Just as Holly finished her little speech, Mr. Russo walked into the apartment, his usual friendly smile plastered on his face. "Ah, you must be Holly," he said, extending a hand. "I've heard so much about you. And this must be Luke, right?" Luke shifted uncomfortably, not quite sure where this was going. Holly just stared at Mr. Russo like he was some kind of intruder. But then, in the same calm, knowing voice, he added something that I will never forget. "Well," he said, turning toward me, "I just wanted to make sure you had everything you needed. And I guess now's as good a time as any to let you know something important." Holly and Luke exchanged confused looks as Mr. Russo handed me a set of keys. "Say hello to the new building owner," he said, beaming at me. And just like that, my life changed. Holly's face went pale. Luke's jaw practically hit the floor. They both looked at me, waiting for an explanation, but I didn't offer one. "Wait. What?" Holly asked, her voice trembling just a little now. You own this place?" I nodded, holding up the keys for them to see. "Yep. This whole building, actually." Luke's expression shifted from confusion to something else. Maybe regret. I didn't care to decipher it. Holly's smug demeanor melted into something closer to panic. "You're joking," she said, half laughing, half sobbing. This is ridiculous." "You can't," I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a smile of victory, it was something much quieter. A smile of satisfaction. After everything they had done, after all the insults, the lies, and the betrayal, I had won. Not in the way they expected, but in a way that mattered. Mr. Russo, noticing the shift in the atmosphere, excused himself and left us to process the news. Holly and Luke stood there, their mouths hanging open, unable to fully grasp the significance of what had just happened. "I'm sure you two have a lot of questions," I said, finally breaking the silence. "But I don't think I'm going to answer them." I wasn't interested in explaining how I had saved up, how I'd worked overtime, how I had put every ounce of my energy into rebuilding my life. I wasn't interested in hearing their excuses. They stood there for a long time, awkwardly shuffling their feet, unsure of what to do next. They had no idea how to react to this turn of events, and it was the first time in a long while that I felt like I held the power. Not because of the building, but because I had finally taken control of my life, my happiness. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to be their version of what success was supposed to look like. "I'm sorry, but I need to go," Luke said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, almost ashamed. But it was too late for apologies. Holly just nodded, her face unreadable. She looked at me one last time, then turned and walked out with Luke trailing behind her. The door shut quietly behind them. I don't know if they ever truly understood what they did to me, but I had stopped caring. I had done what they thought was impossible, I had rebuilt my life, brick by brick. I owned the building now. It wasn't just the walls, the roof, or the keys in my hand. It was my peace, my redemption. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The silence that followed their departure was deafening. For a long while I just stood in the middle of the apartment, staring at the keys in my hand. They felt heavier than they should have, as if they were not just keys to a building, but keys to a new life I hadn't fully understood until that very moment. It was almost surreal. The thing I had been working toward for months, the thing they thought would never happen, was now a reality. I had done it. But even in my triumph, I couldn't shake the strange, bittersweet feeling that lingered. I'd gotten what I wanted, what I needed, but I still hadn't fully dealt with what they had done to me. I sat down on the small couch, trying to process everything. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent, the hum of the laundromat below mixing with the quiet of the night. It was lonely. But it wasn't the same kind of loneliness I had felt when I had first moved in. Back then, I had been lost, unsure of what my life was going to look like after Holly and Luke had shattered everything. Now, this was different. I was rebuilding. I was creating something new. A soft knock on the door broke my train of thought. I opened it to find Mr. Russo standing there, his ever-present smile on his face. "Got a minute?" he asked, holding up a clipboard. "I just wanted to go over some final paperwork with you. But it can wait if you're busy." "No, it's fine." "Come on in," I said, motioning for him to enter. Mr. Russo stepped inside and surveyed the small apartment. I can already tell, he said, nodding approvingly. You're going to make this place something special. You've got a good eye for these things. Thanks, I replied, my voice tinged with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. I didn't want to get too emotional, but it was hard not to. There was a part of me that wanted to just collapse into his arms and thank him for believing in me when I had nothing to show for myself. But I didn't do that. Instead, I gestured to the chair beside me. So, what's the paperwork? He sat down, flipping through the pages. Just some legal stuff, now that you're officially the owner. A few signatures here and there. You know the drill. He paused, studying my face for a moment. How are you holding up? I know it's been a lot. I tried to smile, but it felt weak. I'm okay. I'm getting there. I know it's hard, he said, his tone softer now. But I want you to know you're doing a great job. You've come a long way. And I'm sure this place is going to be something amazing once you're done with it. I nodded, feeling a small spark of hope flicker inside me. Thanks, Mr. Russo. I appreciate it. As he went through the paperwork, I couldn't help but wonder what Holly and Luke were doing. I didn't want to care, but the truth was I did. I wasn't ready to let go of the past completely, not yet. I still had questions. Why had they done it? What had I missed? Where had it all gone wrong? I shook my head, trying to focus. I couldn't keep looking backward. The future was ahead of me, and I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't allow myself to be consumed by what they had done to me. I had to make this new life work. Days turned into weeks, and the renovations on the building progressed slowly but steadily. I spent hours each day, overseeing contractors, making decisions about the layout, the design, the feel of the space. I was living on a tight budget, but every time I saw progress, every time I walked through a freshly painted wall or past a new fixture, I felt a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the building anymore. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my life. I had hired a few new tenants by then, people who had heard about the new management and were excited about the changes. The first was an artist named Sarah, a quiet woman in her mid-30s who had recently gone through a messy divorce herself. She'd been living in a rundown apartment across town, but she was drawn to the space I was creating. I knew exactly what she meant. There was something about the building, something about the way it was being transformed, that spoke to both of us. It was a fresh start for both of us. The second was a young couple, Emily and Jake, who were moving in from out of state. They had no idea about the building's history or the drama that had unfolded there. They were just happy to have found a new place that they could afford. I didn't tell them the backstory. It wasn't relevant anymore. They were starting their own chapter, and so was I. The more I worked on the building, the more I felt like I was finally shedding the weight of the past. Holly and Luke, their mocking comments, the hurt, they all started to feel smaller, more distant. I was starting to find my footing again, and with each passing day, I felt stronger. But then, a few months later, something happened that brought everything rushing back. I was working late one evening, sitting at my desk in the office, going over some paperwork when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was a little surprised when I opened it to find Luke standing there, looking like he'd been dragged through the mud. "Luke?" I said, frowning. "What are you doing here?" He looked down at the floor for a moment, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. After everything that had happened, I didn't know if I was ready to face him. But I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. "Okay. Talk." He sat down on one of the chairs across from my desk, his eyes scanning the room as if he didn't quite know what to make of it. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I've tried calling Holly, but she's not answering. And I don't know what to do anymore." I didn't know how to react. A part of me wanted to yell at him, tell him everything I'd been holding inside for months. But instead, I just stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. I messed up, he said quietly. I messed up so badly. I never should have. I never should have done what I did to you. I was stupid, and I was selfish, and I ruined everything. I didn't know what to say to that. The anger I once felt for him had faded, but it was replaced by something else, something that almost felt like pity. He was broken now, just like I had been, but I wasn't sure I could feel sorry for him. Not anymore. Not after everything. Why are you here? I finally asked. Why come to me now? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the floor, as if he were searching for the right words. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said slowly, lifting his gaze to meet mine. I need to know if there's any chance of fixing things. Anything. I know I've hurt you beyond repair, but I need to ask. Can you ever forgive me? Or is it too late for that? I stared at Luke, feeling 1,000 emotions swirl inside me. There was the anger, yes, but there was also a strange kind of pity. He was sitting there, looking broken, vulnerable, as if he'd come to me for some kind of salvation. But I didn't have that to offer him. Not anymore. You want forgiveness? I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. You want me to forgive you for what you did? For betraying me? For helping my sister, my own sister, ruin everything I thought I had? You want me to pretend like none of that ever happened? Luke opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, silencing him before he could speak. No. You don't get to just waltz back into my life and expect things to magically go back to normal. You lost that right the moment you chose her over me. You destroyed everything. His face contorted with regret, but he didn't interrupt. Instead, he nodded, acknowledging my words. I don't expect everything to go back to the way it was, he said quietly. But I have to know, can we ever be okay again? Or is this it? For a moment, I simply stared at him. I wanted to scream, to shout at him for the pain he caused me, but I didn't. I had learned that silence could be just as powerful as anger. And right now, silence was my weapon. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the building I now owned, the one I had worked so hard to make something of. I had poured every ounce of energy into it, transforming it into something beautiful. It was a reflection of me, a fresh start, a new life that didn't need his apology to be valid. Turning back toward Luke, I found myself calm, detached, as if I were looking at a stranger instead of the man I once loved. It's too late, I said quietly, my words cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. You had your chance. And you blew it. His eyes flickered with hurt, but there was nothing left in me to give. He didn't deserve my forgiveness. Not now. Not ever. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice trembling. I truly am. Sorry doesn't fix what you broke, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. And I'm done letting you and Holly control my life. I've moved on. I'm in control now. The room felt small, suffocating. For a moment, we both just stood there, neither of us speaking, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Luke stood up, his posture defeated. He didn't argue, didn't try to change my mind. He simply nodded once, his face pale, and turned toward the door. But before he left, he paused, looking back at me one last time. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said softly, his voice barely audible. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched him walk out the door, the sound of his footsteps growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. And when the door clicked shut behind him, it felt like the last piece of that old life had been sealed away. There was no more holding on to the past. No more wondering about what could have been. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The building was coming together beautifully. Tenants were moving in, the renovations were nearly complete, and I was finally starting to see the fruits of my labor. I couldn't deny that it felt good to see something I had worked so hard for finally taking shape. I was no longer the woman who had been abandoned and betrayed. I was the woman who had taken control of her life, her destiny, and her future. But then came the day when I saw Holly again. I was walking to the corner store when I saw her across the street, standing with a few of her friends. She was laughing, chatting as if everything was fine. But when she saw me, her smile faltered, and she looked away quickly. I didn't need to be told what was going through her mind. She was probably wondering how I had managed to rebuild after everything they'd done. She was probably wondering how I had moved on so easily, as if I hadn't been broken by their betrayal. I stood there for a moment, watching her, and then I did something I never thought I would. I crossed the street, walked straight up to her, and stood in front of her. Holly's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice defensive, as if she was bracing herself for an argument. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at her. And for the first time in a long time, I saw her for what she truly was. A person who had been selfish, thoughtless, and desperate for attention. Someone who had chosen her own desires over family, over the people who cared for her. I wasn't angry anymore. Just indifferent. "I'm doing just fine," I said calmly, my voice unwavering. "I've rebuilt my life, Holly. I'm stronger than I ever was. And you know what? I don't need your approval to do it. I don't need to explain myself to you. I'm done with all of this." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't think I'm better. I know I am. Because I've learned something you'll never understand. I've learned that I don't need to tear others down to feel good about myself. And that's something you and Luke will never get." Her face flushed red with anger, but I wasn't interested in fighting with her. I had nothing left to say to her. She wasn't the sister I had known anymore. She wasn't the person I wanted in my life. "You've really changed," she spat, her words full of venom. "You think you've won, don't you?" "No," I replied softly, meeting her gaze with a quiet confidence. "I don't think I've won. I know I have." With that, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me to prove. I had taken everything they had thrown at me and turned it into something stronger, something beautiful. I had built my life from the ashes of their betrayal, and no matter what they said or did, they could never take that away from me. Over the next few months, life settled into a new routine. I focused on the building, on the tenants, on the future. I was proud of what I had accomplished. More importantly, I was at peace. I had rebuilt my life, and in doing so, I had finally let go of the past.